to host our speakers, Sebastian, Strangio, Sophal here, and Courtney Weatherby for a discussion and a readout on last weekend's Commune elections in Cambodia. The Stimson Center Southeast Asia program typically does reporting and analysis on Mekong issues in general, having to do with water, energy, hydropower. If you've been here before, you know that's what we look at, and it's a great opportunity, we think, to begin to dig a little bit more deeply into the political processes that are unfolding within the countries of the Mekong region, and to talk about the progress and perils of democracy in Cambodia. To give a brief introduction, Cambodia's recent experiment with democracy started in the early 1990s with the UN-sponsored elections of 1993 that partially put current Prime Minister Hun Sen in power. He had been ruling for about a decade before that, being installed by the Vietnamese-led Cambodian government after the Khmer Rouge, and since then has set up what many describe as an impenetrable political system that involves very deep patronage networks, a family tree. It has been described as an oligarchic system that holds sway over the political and economic outputs and outcomes of Cambodia. Since then, and particularly over the last 10 years, an opposition party the opposition movement has always been part of the political scene in Cambodia since the early 90s, but a strong opposition movement has begun to emerge. And that most recent iteration of that opposition movement started about 5 years ago with the Cambodian National Rescue Party, led by Sam Rainsy, and now the current leader of the Cambodian National Rescue Party, Kem Sokha. And since then, the opposition party has been making modest gains against the dominant Cambodian People's Party, led by Prime Minister Hun Sen. The results of this most recent commune election, which will serve, as many say, as a bellwether for the coming results of next year's 2018 national level elections, are mixed, and they're still coming in. The Cambodian National Rescue Party has claimed victory and received anywhere between 30 and 45% of the vote. And perhaps our speakers have seen even more recent data, and they can update us on this. But the Cambodia's People's Party, led by Hun Sen, still received a majority of the vote in the recent commune elections. And despite the grooming of a new leadership, a rising cohort of youthful leaders within the Cambodia's People's Party, and a savvy social media program that was arranged in a counter response to what the opposition party had been establishing over the years. Despite this new grooming of a youthful leadership as well as a social media platform to get the vote out, the Cambodia's People's Party hold on government was eroded over this last election. So what we are looking for today is to have some analysis of the recent results of last weekend's Cambodia's the commune elections, and discuss what these results mean for the political process moving forward in Cambodia and its impact on the region at large. And importantly, what is the U.S. role? Because we are here in Washington, and we want to think about what would be the U.S. Role in this process moving forward. My name is Brian Eyler. I'm the director of the Southeast Asia program here at the Stimson Center. Joining us today for this panel is Sebastian Strangio, who is one of the top commentators and journalists covering Southeast Asia today. He is consistently quoted and publishing pieces in top media outlets on happenings in Southeast Asia, and has recently, well, not so recently, 2014, published a book called Hun Sen's Cambodia, and it was one of the first in-depth looks at Hun Sen's political control over the country and the history behind that development. Following Sebastian will be Professor Sophal, who is an associate professor at Occidental College in California. He also is one of the world's top political commentators and experts on Cambodia's political process. Just to contrast, to provide a little bit of contrast on some things that you and Sophal said recently in the news, right before the election, Sebastian Strangio had an article in Foreign Policy entitled "Democracy Makes Its Last Gasps" in Cambodia. And recently, Sophal said in RFA a few days ago that the CNRP improvement in this commune election amounted to a win. So there seems to be some differences in the way that the two of you are analyzing this. To round out our panel is my colleague Courtney Weatherby, who is a research analyst here at the Stimson Center within our Stimson Southeast Asia program. And she will provide some analysis of how infrastructure development, hydropower, land concessions, railways, and highways are impacting the political process in Cambodia. So this is our panel. I'm going to turn it over to Sebastian first. We have Professor Eyler calling in from California up here on this Skype. Sebastian.
All right, thank you, Brian. Let's make sure my mic is functioning. Well, thanks for your introduction, and it's good to see so many people here. Commune elections in Cambodia don't normally attract very much international attention, but given the political context of the last few years with a disputed and hotly contested national election in 2013, they're attracting a lot of attention this year as a possible foreshadowing of what might happen in 2018 at the next national elections in July. July next year, that is. The National Election Committee yesterday released its first provisional results for the commune election. So we now know that pending the resolution of complaints that have been lodged by the two parties, the CPP has won control of just over 70% of commune councils, leaving the remaining round about 30% to the Cambodian National Rescue Party. But if we look at the share of the popular vote, we see that it's a lot closer. We don't have any official figures yet on what the popular vote was, but estimates put it around 51% for the CPP to 46% for the opposition, which, if we compare to the 2012 commune election, is quite a significant gain for the CNRP. In 2012, they won just 30% of the popular vote, and the CPP won over 60%. I think the first thing to note about this election is the extremely high voter turnout. The NEC has announced that 89.5% of registered voters turned up to cast a ballot on polling day, which I think reflects an encouraging degree of interest among the Cambodian electorate about what's at stake over the next couple of years, and also an indication of their determination to play a part in selecting the next generation of political leadership in the country. Now, these lists were recently computerized, so it's possible that the spike results from the elimination of duplicates and deceased voters from the list. But even then, that speaks more to it suggests that the earlier voter turnouts have been deflated rather than the current one being inflated. And so, 90% voter turnout is something that in the United States would be, we would welcome with open arms, I'm sure. The second thing to note about this election was the degree to which it was carried out in an atmosphere of calm, placidity, and relative peace. This certainly belied the violent, warlike rhetoric that was coming out of the CPP during the campaign period. In a speech on May 25th, Hun Sen accused the opposition of trying to launch a color revolution to overthrow the government, and said he was willing to, quote, eliminate 100 or 200 people in order to prevent the country's slide back into civil war and the millions of deaths that would result from that. The defense minister, Ban, a few days earlier said that he would send troops into the streets to, quote, smash the teeth of anybody protesting the commune election result, as the CNRP did in 2013 with a long campaign of public demonstrations. Now, part of the reason for this is that these elections don't significantly affect the distribution of political power in Cambodia. There is some significance in the fact that the CNRP will now control a third of the communes. This is the first time that any opposition party has controlled a significant number of commune councils. And this is a level of government that the CPP is essentially controlled since its installation in power in 1979. But without a change at the national level, it's unlikely that this is going to significantly change how the country is run. Political power and economic resources will continue to flow through the party and personal patronage networks linked to the CPP, regardless of whether those networks are ensconced within formal state institutions of any kind. The real importance, of course, of this election is like Brian said, is what it suggests about the country heading towards next year's national election. And so while this election did little to directly loosen Hun Sen's hold on power, it sets the stage for what is, I'm sure, will be a hotly contested election. Now, I think both parties have reasons to be pretty happy with their performance in this election, if the current results stand. This is another reason that we're unlikely to see any significant instability in the coming months. For Kem Sokha, the leader of the CNRP, this election showed for the first time that he can lead the party into a major election and get good results. Since taking over from Sam Rainsy in March or April, after Rainsy's forced resignation, essentially, from the party in February, he's had a challenge in proving that he's the right guy to lead the party and to carry it through to national elections next year. I think he's got the result that he needs to instill that confidence now. For the CPP and Prime Minister Hun Sen, the election essentially preserved roughly the margin of victory in the popular vote that they had at the 2013 national election. And I think for Hun Sen, this will be, this will instill confidence that the party can scrape through the 2018 election with a similar margin of victory. And this self-assuredness was expressed by Hun Sen on Facebook, currently his favored mode of public interaction.
Not Twitter.
Not Twitter, no. Twitter in Cambodia Twitter's dead, but Facebook is booming. And he posted a long message in which he thanked everybody for voting peacefully and expressed confidence that he would hold on to power at the next election in 2018. And this was posted alongside photos of himself playing golf, which I think sort of sums up his attitude towards this whole this election on Sunday, or at least the result of the election. In short, I think we shouldn't, or the CPP can't really rest easy. I think that they're always likely to poll more strongly at the local level because of the prominent role that commune officials and village officials play in ordinary Cambodians' lives and have played for so many years. I think the CNRP will be much stronger campaigning on a national platform, on national issues like land grabbing, deforestation, high-level corruption, and unresponsive government institutions. And so I would predict if the CPP employs similar tactics that it employed in 2013, when they zeroed in on exactly these issues, I think that it's likely that they will poll better than they did on Sunday. And I think this is something that the CPP is, a threat that the CPP is prepared for. To sum up, I think the peacefulness of this election should not deceive us about the tensions underlying the Cambodian political scene at the moment. At the national election next year, the stakes will be immeasurably higher for both parties. Strong turnout and solid support for the CNRP demonstrate that the CPP's traditional political formula, which is that we rescued you from the Khmer Rouge and we brought stability and we built that road in your village, is no longer going to cut it for an increasing proportion of the Cambodian electorate, and that people are less scared by the threats coming down from above. When they get into the voting booth, into the secrecy of the voting booth, they aren't afraid to pull the lever, so to speak, for the CNRP. On the other hand, the CPP has given itself every tool, legal, political, and economic, that it needs in order to either prearrange the result of the election next year or to challenge and overturn that result should it fail to go its way. Hun Sen and senior leaders have consistently through the years expressed the view that their party's continuation in power is congruent with national survival and the prosperity of the Cambodian nation, and that they see any opposition takeover as akin to Cambodia collapsing back into civil war, and I think they genuinely believe this, and they'll do whatever they need to do to hold on to power. And so I think while Hun Sen's popularity seems to be slipping, his power remains mostly intact, and his threats to use force need to be treated as credible threats going towards the next election. I think Hun Sen has been emboldened further by something that Sophal might add to now, but the rise of Chinese influence in Cambodia over the last decade or so, which in my view, and I argue this in the foreign policy article that Brian mentioned before, has undercut the leverage of Cambodia's traditional aid donors, including the United States, Japan, and the European Union, among others. So with rising Chinese support emboldening Hun Sen to take more drastic actions to secure his party's hold on power, and a rising challenge from a Cambodian population that is more educated and more connected to the outside world than ever before, I think the stage could be set for a tumultuous and unpredictable electoral period over the next year. And I guess now I'll pass it on to my colleague Sophal, who will expand a little on, I think, the international dimension to this whole situation in Cambodia. Thank you.
Thanks, Sebastian. Sophal, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'd love to see this huge audience that has turned out. Just picking up from Sebastian's point about China, even though it's not my starting point, I want to try to develop that a little bit here, and to say that obviously it's been a long time running, the relationship between Cambodia and China, this increasing sort of marriage, maybe of convenience, but really of China needing Cambodia to take its side on, say, the South China Sea, for example, when it comes to ASEAN. And so, as a result, of course, a lot of investment and aid has flowed from China to Cambodia, and that's made Cambodia less dependent on traditional Western donors, to the point where, I think earlier this year or perhaps last year, the Prime Minister did say, when there was a kind of a threat about U.S. aid being cut, and that wasn't, I think, under President Trump. It was just, we should look at U.S. foreign aid and how it should go to countries that improve their performance, their governance. He said, why don't stop talking about it? Why don't you cut it off already? And it's emboldening. And of course now with the administration in place talking about cutting foreign aid generally, and including in Cambodia, it means even less footprint for the United States, less influence on that level. Of course, in terms of garment purchase, that's a huge other element. It has to do with the amount of money that Cambodia earns from foreign exchange in the sale, in the production of garments that are sold to the United States and the EU, and that's not something that's been dangled as a kind of, well, if you don't improve your human rights, we're going to look at how we do trade with you. After all, Cambodia is a member of the WTO and must be treated as with a membership organization like that equally to every other member. So anyhow, I wanted to address that just at the outset. I will say, to set a bit of the context here, since Brian asked me to talk about the election results in the broader context of democratization and political development in Cambodia, that Sebastian's point about the local election being fairly humdrum is right. I mean, in 2002, you had the CPP claiming 1,598 commune chiefs, nearly 99% of all communes. Pretty much the same in 2007. They claimed 7 fewer commune chiefs, 1,591, while the Sam Rainsy party claimed 28. And in 2012, the results were essentially the same again, except that the Human Rights Party that Kem Sokha led took some seats from some commune chief seats from the Sam Rainsy party. So there's been really very little evolution in terms of the commune council picture up until really this year when things changed dramatically. I mean, at this time, the early estimates suggest at least 480 commune chiefs under Cambodian National Rescue Party control, possibly over 500. And if you compare that just to 2012, where combined the Sam Rainsy Party and the Human Rights Party got 40 commune council chiefs, this is a dozen times more, so more than 12-fold increase in the number of commune chiefs now controlled by the opposition. So that's probably why Brian was saying that the picture that Sebastian painted in terms of this last gasp of democracy is perhaps more of the glass is half empty versus my view, post-election at least, that the glass is perhaps half full. I mean, it's quite amazing to see how much progress the opposition was able to undertake despite incredible odds, really. If you think about it, you've got 25 identified political prisoners, really, at this point, according to Likado, one of the top human rights defender organizations in Cambodia. You had the murder, really, of Ken Lay last year, an amended electoral law that essentially threatens to dissolve the opposition at any turn. It literally hangs over the head of the opposition as a kind of axe. If they protest, if they dispute, if they're found to have a convicted person in their leadership, which was why Sam Rainsy had to resign from his position as party leader to save the Cambodian National Rescue Party, they could be dissolved. And so this hangs above them perpetually now, and yet they were able to do, I think, some incredible things. Sebastian mentioned 100 to 200 people to be eliminated. I think this is a direct reference to 1997, when the last violent incident happened, in which about 100 to 200 people were killed, perhaps more than that. But that's about the range, and it's really a reminder. And I think the Prime Minister mentioned 1997 as in case anyone is wondering, what is he talking about? 100 to 200 people. It's literally that incident to get people to understand that he's serious about it. So you have to wonder, despite all of that, all of the essentially unfair advantage the ruling party had, whether that resulted in essentially people turning away from the CPP, or whether it helped to secure, at the very least, that majority that they could cling on to and say, we're still the majority party. We still have 51% of the vote, of the popular vote at this point. So I do think really the results are heartening, considering how much arm twisting was done by the ruling party. And if you think about what the international community needs to do really to salvage the situation in Cambodia in terms of democracy, you have to think about it in the context of the last 25 years. Since UNTAC, there's there's been a series of elections, many of which have gone from, the UNTAC election itself was really the fairest and freest because it was under the control of an independent party, the United Nations. But subsequent to that, everything else has essentially been more or less locally run. And do we give up now, essentially? Do we say, well, really, this is where things return to after a quarter of a century, and if it's not going to be democracy, at least they're not going to kill each other to the point of 1975, 1978. And that, of course, is always this baseline scene. And, you know, as long as 2 million people don't die, things are better than they were then. So it's unfortunate. I think the U.S. Can and should step up instead of turning away or ducking leadership in the region, and especially in Cambodia, where a lot of investment has already been made to demand accountability there. I'm not particularly optimistic given the direction that the current White House has taken with respect to human rights, which essentially is there's been no real talk of human rights, no emphasis on governance. But I do know that people who are on the right, on the Republican side of the aisle, do care about Cambodia and care about democracy and human rights there, and have had a long history of caring about democracy and human rights there, because after all, it's seen as the place that was abandoned essentially by the left after the Vietnam War to its own defenses and allowed to fall into a genocide. And I'm certain that there is a recognition that essentially, if we don't do something about the direction in which Cambodia turns going forward, it will probably turn out badly again. And I hope it's not going to be the 100 to 200 people. I mean, that's already too many people. So that's really the set comments that I have at this point. I'm really looking forward to questions later after Courtney is done with her comments so that we can have a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophal.
I will just get my mic turned on here so that everybody can hear me. As Brian said at the start of the panel, I will, rather than talk about the commune elections at the local level, sort of draw back a little bit, both looking at Stimson's work on environmental and energy issues in the region and the role that these play in Cambodia's national elections. So as Sebastian had mentioned, many of the CNRP's most attractive policies, looking at fighting corruption, addressing deforestation and environmental degradation, improving public services, these are popular on the national level. At the local level, this is largely due to the commune leaders. And so while there were a couple specific instances in this election of individuals who identified environmental policy as a focus for their local platforms, particularly in Siem Reap, where tourism is a big draw and environmental policy matters, I'm actually going to look back at the previous elections and sort of the environmental politics that have been playing out in the years since then and what that may mean looking at the CNRP's outcomes moving forward. So in the 2013 elections, as we all know, the CNRP made significant gains. It was a very hotly disputed election, and the CPP lost a number of seats in the National Assembly. And while there are many reasons for this, obviously the CNRP's policies on human rights, on corruption, on economic development are one of the main attractants. One underlying sort of secondary factor in this is environmental degradation, which in Cambodia is tied very closely to perceptions of corruption among the elite. When you look at development projects, individual development projects that have significant social and environmental impacts at the local level, many of these are tied closely to cronyism. You have specific elites often connected very closely to high members within CPP, including Hun Sen's family. And they are involved in a non-transparent process for projects, whether that's a hydropower project or a plantation or other infrastructure projects like railways or roads. And you have impacts at the local level that are deeply impacting local communities' livelihoods and living standards. On the national scale, we see this in deforestation impacts. You see for most hydropower projects in Cambodia, there's also a deforestation element where the companies are coming in and they're taking timber out of the local area. So it's closely tied to development. And Cambodia's got one of the highest deforestation rates in the last decade globally. they now have only about 3% of their primary forest left by many estimates. So this is significant change for a country where many livelihoods and populations have depended on natural resources for many years. Equally important and tied to the work that Stimson is doing on food security and food, water, energy in the region are the potential impacts from hydropower projects, again, often moving forward under the aegis of CPP-affiliated individuals, on fisheries. Fisheries provide about 60% of the protein in Cambodia. So when you look at the national scale, these issues matter a lot. And the CPP historically has been seen as promoting hydropower and coal, which, as we all know, has its own environmental impacts on both a local and regional scale. So the CNRP has stood out in the last few years for identifying this as an area where they have a better reputation, and they've criticized specific projects. And it's important to note as well that within Cambodia, it appears that specific projects are the easiest to target. The awareness on the national scale among the populace about climate change, about broader environmental degradation, pollution, deforestation, these issues, awareness on these issues is rising. But it most impacts people's opinions when they can see the impacts at the local level or on a very controversial project. So, for instance, in 2014, after the election fallout had essentially ended, the CNRP started identifying the Stung Arang project in Kokong area, which is a small, relatively small 108 megawatt dam that was extremely controversial because it's in a biodiversity hotspot and has impacts on local communities, the Chong minority. So this started getting international attention, and the CNRP jumped on this as an instance of where their particular focus on corruption and transparency in the process for these projects would have made a difference, essentially advocating that the environmental and social impact assessment was non-transparent, had just not been done to a high enough standard, and started publicizing this issue. So you had a CNRP member from the National Assembly Commission on Rural Development and Environmental Issues leading a visit of members to the site. You eventually had Sam Rainsy discussing this with Hun Sen and announcing publicly that Hun Sen had said there would be a moratorium on the project. So in this case, this was a specific instance of CNRP leadership on environmental issues. There are others as well within the broader energy sector, or just earlier this year, in fact. We've seen Cambodia going through its master energy planning process, which under the current Ministry of Energy of Mines and Energy in Cambodia is very focused on coal and hydropower, which, as we know, is with specific coal and hydropower projects, these are unpopular at the local level. People have not in my backyard feelings about these projects. And the CPP has been pushing forward a very coal hydropower dependent way of electrifying the country. And again, electricity supports economic development and also supports the rising of living standards. So neither party is saying don't build electricity projects, but they're taking very different tacks on what type of energy should be built out. The CNRP has come out saying that if they win in the 2018 elections, they've set a target goal of 20% non-hydro renewable energy by 2020, which would be a significant scaling up, even if you're looking at both solar and wind, from what is currently a 10 megawatt pilot case study project that's just started moving forward this year. So you can see a divergence here in the way that they're emphasizing environmental impact and sustainable development within the broader political atmosphere in Cambodia. At the same time, we also saw some shifts within the Cambodian People's Party in the way that they are identifying themselves on this issue. After the 2013 elections, with those losses, Hun Sen directly appointed someone to the Minister Sebastian to the Ministry of Environment and gave him a mandate saying we need to burnish our credentials on this issue. It's clear that the CNRP is outperforming us. It's clear that there are a lot of opportunities to improve. Whether or not this will be improvements on paper or implementation is obviously a big question, but we've seen significant progress within the last few years on environmental impact assessment laws within Cambodia. There's been a process, including with outside consultants, and at least 7 open consultation processes with people in Cambodia on rewriting the environmental impact assessment law to improve the standards. And again, this was done under the aegis of the Ministry of Environment, but it was done with outside consultants and is a step forward. It's not yet passed, but our understanding is that the CPP government aims to get this passed by the end of this year so that they can start having the impacts on at least a few specific projects before the 2018 elections to show that there's been improvement on the environmental impact standards, as well as within the broader overlapping of many agencies. So in Cambodia, you've got a variety of departments within different ministries that address water, forestry management, fisheries management, just natural resource management in general. So along with the environmental impact assessment, the Minister of Environment has been responsible for negotiation and clarification of which ministries are responsible for which roles as part of a broader environmental code aimed, again, at streamlining certain processes. This similarly has been finalized within the government but has not passed yet, so the actual impacts of this are unclear. But it does appear that there are those within the higher levels of the CPB that recognize this is an issue upon which the CNRP opposition can really hit them. And so they're seeking to make improvements before the elections next year. Kind of a summary of what's happening there, obviously with the commune elections, that these national politics were not necessarily a major factor in that. But as Sophal and Sebastian have discussed, we've seen significant movement forward in a number of communes for the CNRP. Now, whether or not these issues will play at the local level is very unclear, but if they can effectively start to improve public services, including things like local resource management, that could potentially support the CNRP's policy development for the 2018 elections on these issues. So I will just end there. I know there's a lot of questions, probably more for Sebastian and Sophal than for me. So.
Not clearly on that. Hopefully we will have some good questions from our audience on a range of issues and how you interpret the results of these elections as well. I'm going to start out with an easier question, something that I'd like a little bit of personal clarification on. What does it mean if I'm in a commune in Cambodia and now my leader is a leader of the CNRP and not of the CPP? How does that impact my life? And then, more broadly, how will this impact the political process that evolves from the communes going forward? And this is for anyone to answer.
I can take a stab at it. I think the CPP's tendency to conflate the state with the party, and to conflate both of those with the personal networks of patronage and obligation that emanate out from Prime Minister Hun Sen and his close associates, it complicates the question of how people will experience the changeover in power at the commune level. You might have somebody who's formally appointed CNRP, someone from the CNRP who's serving as the chief of the commune council. But I think control of most state resources come through these personal networks with the CPP brand name emblazoned upon them. And so I think that these CNRP commune chiefs are going to struggle to gain access to resources. Really, we don't know how it's going to play out because it's a relatively, as Sophal said, there's never been a significant number of communes under the control of the opposition. But there was a leaked report that came up in the Cambodian press yesterday or the day before, somebody from the CPP saying that they would essentially starve the CNRP communes of funds, or that those funds would come through, and I'm extrapolating here, but those funds might come through CPP party networks instead. And so the message, if you're somebody living in a village where there's a CNRP guy sitting in the commune council office, the message would be that the CPP is still there to provide for you. Most public services would probably, or most handouts, would probably be delivered by the CPP still. And whether the CNRP takes on some more of the state duties of registering marriages and solving local disputes, it's hard to say at the moment. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But it's certainly the CPP has shown in the past that when the opposition wins formal political office and gains control of state institutions and ministries, it merely redirects its patronage around those institutions. And so any institution that the CPP doesn't control essentially ceases to matter. And I think my guess would be that the communes would operate in a similar way. But again, this is uncharted territory to some extent, so we have to wait and see.
And I would add to Sebastian's point about how essentially the resources, even prior to the opposition winning the number of commune chiefs they've won now, was very bleak. I mean, to be a commune chief, and to control a commune essentially in Cambodia isn't to control a lot of resources. I co-authored a study with Netra Ang in the Journal of Southeast Asian Economy, and it appears that the actual fiscal decentralization that has taken place is really minimal. Yes, promises were made about decentralizing resources and so on, but if you go to any commune, the building, the commune building versus the CPP building, there's no comparison. The CPP local party headquarters is going to look fantastic compared to the commune headquarters, and it's really, it speaks volumes as to how they've always wanted to essentially control the resources through the party instead of even through state institutions. But obviously, the leak of this document saying, we'll just make sure they don't get the resources, does not. Well, first of all, it's bad. I mean, to have something like that leak out, but it might actually backfire as people understand, first of all, that there's not much to come from the commune. This is why the CNRP ran on a platform to increase the amount of allocations per commune to $500,000 per year. Those kinds of resources would make a difference for a commune, but it's unlikely that would happen given that the people who decide how much resources go to communes are actually at the national level, and so they'd have to win at the national level to actually really make a dent in that. And it would, of course, mean decentralizing resources in a way that the CPP has not been comfortable with at the commune level. I mean, giving communes access to those kinds of resources would add up to hundreds of millions of dollars. What does it mean if my commune chief is CNRP? It could mean that things are going to get worse for that commune, for the resident of that commune. It could also mean that things are just going to be about the same as well, because they were never getting resources under the CPP anyways, controlling that commune through the commune. They would get resources through the party. And so, hopefully it'll just be one more year before the national elections happen and things can be sorted out, which as a saving grace means that it's not that much of it's just another 13 months essentially before a different outcome could come about. That is, provided the CNRP isn't dissolved before the national elections take place in July 2018.
Always a possibility. Another quick question is, let's fast forward to 2018, and let's say that the CNRP does win. And if there is to be a victory for the CNRP as well as a peaceful transition, there needs to be some type of co-optation or capture, if you will, of the political elite and a breaking down of some of these patronage lines in perhaps the so-called family tree. At the same time, the CNRP would likely have to provide some assurance to Hun Sen for a safe exit from power. What's your read on this transition? Have you seen any data points of movement of capturing the political elite? Because it doesn't seem to be just about winning the popular vote to achieve success.
Yeah, they're really two separate questions. Can the CNRP win an election, and will the CPP relinquish power? On the former question, there's every indication that they can. On the latter question, there's every indication that they won't. So, that again is uncharted territory, and Cambodia's modern history, and probably for its entire history, there's never been a peaceful transfer of power from one regime to another. Mm-hmm. And it really cuts against the life or death political culture that so many Cambodia's political elites are steeped in. And so it would, my view is that, Hun Sen has given every indication that he's not going to let it get to that point. You never know. Hun Sen might decide, he experiences a landslide defeat and, decides to do the mature thing and go out, and even supposing that his party went along with him, it would require, as you say, some sort of guarantee against prosecution or persecution. And it would be an incredibly difficult thing. I mean, this issue of how the communes are going to react to a change in leadership, that same problem applies at the national level, where you have, ministries going to the opposition, and all of a sudden, you've got these massive civil service patronage networks that run throughout the country. You have patronage networks in the security forces, all of which are interlinked with each other. This is uncharted territory for Cambodia. How these networks what the impact would be of their unraveling, and how they would reconstitute themselves, and what Cambodia would have to go through in the meantime. In terms of what's happened in the past on this front, Sam Rainsy has come out and said that we've offered Hun Sen, safe passage and immunity from prosecution if we come to power. But the question of whether enough trust exists for that sort of promise to hold weight and to actually bring the entire CPP and all of its different power centers along, I think remains to be seen. I wouldn't be betting on it.
On my end, I think, when we talk about breaking down of the family tree, certainly I'm thinking about how it's really rebuilding a kind of family tree. I mean, the patron may be knocked out of his position, but a new patron would come in. The Cambodian context is simply that of essentially patronage is the way things are, and in fact, if you don't help your family get a job, or don't help your friend get a job, or don't help your village get a job in the ministry you now control, you're the bad actor. You're the person who isn't behaving according to cultural norms, which, of course, goes against all sense of, which essentially is the support of nepotism. But that is seen as a responsibility for a good actor in Cambodia, in the Cambodian cultural context. So if it even got to that point, that's probably what would happen oftentimes when an abusive regime is knocked out of power. It isn't as if the new folks who take over are saints either. They simply take over the same roles and continue on, maybe a little less abusively, but still very much in a extractive capacity. As for a safe exit, I'm not sure that. Look, there have been trial balloons. In fact, there was even something right after the results right after the Commune election, in which Sark Hang was said to have been told, or there was mentioned that Sark Hang, as deputy prime minister, could stay on if the CNRP were to win. As a signal, really, to the establishment, to the ruling party, that we just want one person to be changed, and clearly that's the prime minister to be changed, and others would be safe. But immediately, the CPP spokesperson, I think, shot that down and said that this is complete garbage and propaganda and will not be tolerated. So, and talk of that hasn't come about. I think the last time there was anything remotely close to a CPP loss was in 1993, and that's when they got fewer votes than Hun Sen, the Royalist Party. And the outcome from that, after saber-rattling, a secession, an attempted secession in the eastern, I think, parts of Cambodia by Prince Chakhapong, was to have a no winners, no losers outcome, basically to throw away the results of the election and to have two prime ministers with equal power. Of course, the titles were slightly different: first prime minister and second prime minister. But I believe Cambodia gave birth to the world's first co-prime ministership arrangement, which of course has not been seen since, and probably won't be seen again.
And it did not persist through the 97 elections as well, or through the 97 period. Okay, well, we're going to turn this over to our audience for questions and to start a discussion. We've got about 40 minutes to get into this. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and identify yourself. After, one of our associates will come around and give you a microphone. Let us know your affiliation as well. Rachel.
Rachel Carrillo, and I'm visiting from Colorado. I'm on the board of United Nations Association of Boulder County. It's a program of the UN Foundation, which is located here in D.C. Thank you all for your informative discussions and highlighting the upcoming elections and things leading up to the upcoming elections. I have a question. Courtney might be the best to respond to this, but whoever may pitch in. With all the different hydropower development and what I believe you said is the kind of social consciousness now on environmental issues, are any of the politicians are any of them or any environmental activists at risk for speaking out against some of the more controversial projects? And when I ask this, I'm thinking of Laos, where people have been disappeared who were very prominent citizens, like Sombat. So I'm just wondering, in the lead-in to the next to the 2018 elections, if there's any consequences of people speaking out and acting out, or even running on a platform that's from that angle, especially when so much aid money is at stake, and he can probably speak a little bit to that.
Thanks. Yeah, I would invite Sebastian or Sophal to chime in, since I suspect they may have more on-the-ground knowledge of this. But generally speaking, environmental activism in Cambodia does have its risks, as we've seen in recent years. For instance, perhaps one of the most prominent, even if you're a foreigner, there are risks. One of the most prominent examples of this for well-known environmental groups is the Mother Nature Organization, which it was involved with the Strangio Dam project that I mentioned before, where many of the activists who had been involved in arranging protests were arrested, and one of the founders of the organization, who was, I believe, Spanish by citizenship, was kicked out of the country and not allowed back in, based on the environmental work that they're doing. There have been, I believe, numerous assassinations or disappearances as well. I honestly don't have the names available.
It was the case of Chatwadi, who was a forest conservationist who was assassinated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably the most prominent example. I believe, like Sombat, he was well known internationally for the activism he had done and had won, I believe, the Magsaysay Award in the region, which is viewed as the Nobel Prize for environmental issues in the region. So it is a dangerous situation. I also would note, though, that I don't know of any politicians who would be running for national elections specifically on an environmental platform, because generally they run on the party platform. And so while the CNRP has, as I mentioned before, taken specific stances on individual projects, identified hydropower as a potential problem because of significant environmental and social impacts, so they've spoken out against individual dams. I don't think that the environmental sustainable development platform is the focus for either of the parties. Most of them frame even discussions of environmental issues within sort of the longer term economic growth. So it's through sustainability, ensuring that we can grow the economy and raise living standards for the country in a sustainable long-term manner, not necessarily on principles of conservation.
So Paul, Sebastian, do you have a response?
I don't really have anything to add. I think Courtney covered it pretty well. So Paul?
And so Paul, I want to make sure you were able to hear the question.
I think I understood it fairly well. I mean, the names that come to mind, of course, are those of Chutwati, who was killed while taking reporters from, I believe it was the Cambodia Daily a few years ago, into the forest and investigating some possibly illegal activity. A movie's been made of it, and Alex Gonzalez, the Spaniard, is still, I believe, these days in Thailand, reporting on sand dredging exports to Singapore. I think the latest figures are that only 1% of Cambodia's sand exports were recorded by Cambodian customs. The rest, all of it, of course, was recorded by Singapore customs coming in. So so that there's underreporting of Cambodia's planned exports, which are apparently the second most resourced, the second biggest resources after water being extracted. So it's causing a lot of environmental damage to see that much going on, and it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars in resources. So now that most of Cambodia's forests are gone, I think they're moving on to other resources that can be extracted and exported. But it's yes, I'd agree with Courtney. It's not something that each party is pushing as its primary platform, but it is something that I think occasionally comes up as a point of difference, and I think a valuable point of difference for the parties. It's always this decision about resources versus livelihoods and how much can be afforded. But I don't think it's been worth. It's been worth it for Cambodia at least to lose as much resources as it has in the last couple of decades.
I would add to that. I think that something that's been much more prominent in political campaigning has been the issue of land, rather than specifically environmental issues, and that has to do with the social and cultural and economic importance of agriculture to the majority of the Cambodian population. That's figured prominently in CNRP campaigns, but explicitly environmental messages haven't really become that prominent, except as you say, they're part of a broader message, anti-corruption sort of message. The CPP has actually taken steps since 2012 to address people's concerns about land grabbing and deforestation. They've been only very partially successful, I would say, up to this point, because the inertia of the patronage state is such that it requires ever greater amounts of resources of one kind or another in order to grease the wheels and to renew those bonds of loyalty and obligation that tie powerful individuals together. And unfortunately, Cambodia's environment has been, in essence, has been fed into that machine for the past 20 years. And that accounts for the high rates of deforestation and land grabbing that we've seen.
Next question, and again, please speak loudly so Paul can hear and identify to whom you're asking the question.
Okay, Mr. Hare. Jeff Dilley, I'm an independent consultant. We've talked about where things are now, and let's be the Bayesian. Can you extrapolate where this is going in the future in the world that now not multilateral but bilateral? Where is the strategic risk in this going, the situation where China has a hand on a strategic piece of real estate already? Where is this going? Look into the future over the next 4 years. Thank you.
Oh, that one's for me?
No, for the gentleman.
Okay. That question is for Sophal.
Okay, and just because the audio wasn't entirely clear, where is this going in the world in terms of bilateral, not just multilateral, but bilateral organization?
Where it's going. The strategic risk.
The strategic risk of where we're going in terms of breakdown of the multilateral system and more focus on bilateral relations, with China at the center of that.
I see. Right. Well, I mean, I think where it's going is that what had been additional layers of possible sort of pressures on Cambodia to essentially have norms, to adopt international norms are essentially going away. I mean, this last 12 months has seen the survival of the UN Human Rights Office in Cambodia. They signed another memorandum of understanding, but it had a clause in there saying that they couldn't be involved in something like the Cambodia's domestic politics or something. And of course, it's like, how can you talk about human rights when you're not involved when you can't comment about domestic politics or aren't involved in the internal affairs of Cambodia? But that's been up to the interpretation of both sides, and it's caused tensions. As you're seeing more entropy in the world, frankly, there's going to be, I think, a tendency for Cambodia for the authorities in Cambodia, sometimes I say Cambodia, but what I mean is the authorities in Cambodia to essentially take more and more liberties with respect to human rights, with respect to democracy, and curtailing essentially democratic rights. I mean, the latest incidents have involved reporters having their passports, a copy of their passports put on Facebook, which included their, birthplace, birth date, picture, etc., as if it was a wanted ad for that individual. And all that arose from was that the reporter went to a commune that had been won by the opposition in 2012 and asked questions about, who did you vote for and why did the opposition win here? And somehow that was seen as illegal. But with China's rise and growing influence, it made for Cambodia's ability to continue to say, well, we don't need the rest of the world. And unfortunately, that was, I thought, a lesson that Myanmar Burma had learned, which is if you stick with China only, you're going to only have China. And that's to the detriment of all your other relationships with other countries. Apparently, Cambodia sees it as, well, China's good enough for us, and so we're going to stick with China. But that's really short-sightedness when you think about, all the rest of the world and what you'll be missing out on in terms of trade, in terms of not necessarily in terms of foreign aid, because the foreign aid picture isn't looking great right now, especially from the U.S. side, but that it represents a choice, a trade-off that they're making, an opportunity cost when they choose China, and it seems that they've chosen wholeheartedly.
Rich.
Thank you. It's a fascinating discussion. Richard Cronin from Stimson Center. It's really hard to formulate the question I have in mind is hard to formulate simply because there are so many variables here, so many things going on. But if you look at the history of colonialism and post-colonialism, colonial governments, et cetera, it does seem that for various historical or other reasons, regimes often maintain some kind of procedural democracy, but very controlled. And so that particularly with Cambodia, with these patronage networks, et cetera, that it's hard for anyone to mobilize. But historically, it's always been mainly democracy established when development takes place, when new classes, middle classes, et cetera, take place that then eventually want to break from the patronage setup and achieve some more influence over state policy. And I just wonder, it's kind of a conundrum in a way that we've been working on the issue of Mekong hydropower dams and environmental and socioeconomic and other impact of these projects. But and it does seem that the type of development is not building any kind of middle class. I mean, it's not. People aren't involved in being trained, getting educated, et cetera, to be involved in these things. Anybody have any way out of this dilemma? In other words, are we just looking at a future that will maybe change gradually because of social and economic change, or is there any other way to see change in Cambodia, real change that brings up new people and new leaders and new elites, et cetera?
I'll have a stab at that, and then you guys can chime in if you like. I mean, the short answer is that it's going to be an incredibly long process. If we look at how democracy developed in our own country and in many of the countries of the West, it was a painstakingly slow process that involved a lot of reverses. There's a huge amount of contingency, historical contingency, in how we ended up with, the 19th century Europe and then the American Revolution before that. And then going through the Second World War and the impact that had on our consciousness in the West. In Cambodia, it's hard to see exactly what's going to drive it. I don't think there's any single silver bullet. I think you're right in saying that economic development is probably the only long-term, the only thing that you can sort of point to that will end up pushing things in a more sustainable direction, in a more democratic direction. But these patronage networks have the reason they've been so successful for the CPP is precisely because they've inhibited the development of independent state institutions, which has enabled the CPP to bend and weave around international donors and to constantly mutate itself in order to meet international and domestic challenges. And as long as those things are bearing fruit for the CPP and continuing to function purely that way, then it's hard to see where that institutionalization is going to begin. Perhaps it begins with Hun Sen choosing to hand off power to a successor and putting in place processes for a transition even within his own party. The slow transition of young leaders into the CPP, bringing with them new life experiences, if not necessarily democratic mindsets, less intolerant and less polarized views of politics, less life and death sort of views of how power works in Cambodia. And hopefully, we have the Cambodian people, making greater demands on their government. I think change is coming to the country. It's very clear. The question for me is whether that change is a step away from Hun Sen is necessarily a step towards democracy, or whether, there are other things in store. And that, the CNRP, I think as Sophal mentioned or hinted at before, they're not necessarily angels either. With, one thing that is very important to realize about their politics is that it contains a very strong strain of ethnically based Khmer nationalism, focused usually on excoriation of the Vietnamese and fear of Vietnam. And I think this is one of the reasons China is such a, from Hun Sen's perspective, is such a great friend to have. Unlike Myanmar, Cambodia doesn't border China, so it doesn't really have an ingrained fear of Chinese domination. Its ingrained fear is all associated with Vietnam, and to a certain extent with Thailand. And so, yeah, I've drifted a little bit away from your original question, but it's going to
direction.
Yeah, it's going to be a long road, and I think that the rise of China in the region, a country that really doesn't care about democratic principles, I think that the essence of my argument in my foreign policy piece was that that period of Western domination in Cambodia, when the Western donor countries would set the agenda, has come to an end. And that headline was not mine, by the way. That was the editor. So last gasp. I wouldn't quite put it that way.
What was your suggested headline?
I never, I'm so bad at writing headlines that I didn't suggest one. I was undead. I wrote it late at night and I just sent it out. I actually think what Sophal said about the CNRP's achievement at this election is very true. They managed to win nearly 50% of the vote, despite huge pressures they face from the government. But the question of whether, when the chips are down, whether the government would respect an electoral result, that's sort of the wider question. And then whether there'd be any Western response to Hun Sen, taking firmer measures.
On my end, I would paraphrase Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of the UK, who said it's really the first 500 years that are the hardest. After that, it's pretty much a piece of cake, right? So at this point, we haven't seen even 25 years post UNTAC, and the achievements are impressive economically speaking. I mean, Cambodia is one of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in the past 20 years. If you believe the poverty figures, sometimes you can quibble with them because they can be manipulated. It's fallen sharply from 50% of the population in 2005 being in poverty to 13.5% in 2014. And Cambodia is now classified by the World Bank as lower middle income. So there is a growing middle class. That middle class is on Facebook. That middle class is, and maybe not even the middle class. Maybe the people who are poorer than middle class can get on Facebook somehow and can partake in electoral politics. I was amazed by the amount of Facebook live feeds that took place in the pre-election period, where rallies were broadcast on Facebook. Party stalwarts were broadcasting their implorations to people, to their followers, to vote a certain way. So it's really transformed electoral politics in Cambodia in ways that I hadn't imagined, in terms of the ability to have that income to then afford the internet access on your smartphone, so that you can watch and see an alternative view of the world than the broadcast television stations, which are, of course, either all controlled by the ruling party or owned by private entities that will not go out of line from what the government tells them to do. So it's things. I think when I ended when I gave a quote to Sebastian for that foreign policy piece, in which he used to end the article, I said, change is coming to Cambodia, whether one wants it or not, and it's happening, and I firmly believe that that it may not fall the way that we expect it to, but things of course change. I mean, not everyone lives forever.
Hi, this is Sakshrina Ten from Voice of America. We all know that the voter turnout this election is quite strong. 7 million people coming, out to vote, half of the population, I would say. So my question to the speaker today: what are the key explanations to this large turnout, and what are you anticipating to see for the national election? Are there more people going to be involved with this political process?
I think it shows that people are interested in playing a part in the selection of their leaders and participating in a political process. And it's, I mean, if you compare it to I can't remember what the turnout was here at last year's election. But I mean, to have 90% of the registered voters turning out is incredible for any democracy. And so, in terms of people's desire to be heard, I think this is an incredibly heartening thing. And it underscores what we've been saying about Cambodia changing. People's expectations are rising because of economic growth and the prolonged period of political stability that Hun Sen has presided over. I think that, we can expect to see a similar voter turnout in 2018. There's a sense of possibility, I think, in Cambodian politics, which also was present in 2013. But I think people have had 5 years to sort of look forward to the next chance that they would have to take part in the process. And they're going to, participate very enthusiastically, I'm sure.
When I'd heard the rates of participation were, at the time, 85%, I thought, wow, this is really high. In fact, it's so high that it seems to sound almost Soviet-like in terms of participation level. So, if anything, it makes me more suspicious that there could be something going on. I mean, if you have usually 60% participation rate, suddenly you get 89% participation rate. That usually that does not happen. Given especially the stakes at the commune level, how few resources are really on the table there. I mean, there's just not that much at stake. But of course, it was probably more of a statement of how the people felt the direction of the country was going. And then I look back at the other participation rates, even at the 85, 89% level. It's in line with 1993, 1998, 2002, 2003, 2007, 2008, 2012, 2013. So I'm sorry, 2003, 2007, 2008, 2012 to 2013 were lower in terms of participation rates. If we stick to about 85% participation rate, so it's impressive. I think with respect to voter suppression of garment workers and of monks in particular, it's even more impressive because there was really an attempt to send a message that, well, if you're going to go out and vote, we're not going to give you time off to go out to vote on election day. And then monks are supposed to be impartial, so you guys should just stay back in the pagoda and not come out. And that's really a very sort of that's not a good message to send if you want civic participation. And instead, you're seeing these numbers. But of course, it's all about how many people were registered, and then how many people voted, and how frequently they voted, if you think there was any kind of fraud going on, and then counting that as the denominator and the number of people who registered as the denominator, and getting a percentage out of that. But I think we'll have to see in 2018 whether those numbers remain as high as they do, and it'll all be in making sure that the voter registration lists are as accurate as possible, inclusive as possible, and that there should not be stories published about soldiers being trucked into remote Siem Reap provinces so that they can vote there. That certainly does not sound like voter participation. It sounds like some sort of machination.
If I may just add one comment as well, something that ties into the last question about changing politics. The youth of Cambodia is also potentially a factor here. It's one of the youngest countries in the region. We know that around, I think, 60% of the population is under 30. So when you consider that, and this was hinted at before with the generational change and also the social media factor here, that is probably also changing the willingness to participate in the political process, because many of these people did not grow up during the time period that is continuously referred to by the CPP as a reason for their legitimacy as the party to be in charge. So that's likely another factor. And information through social media about democracy in other countries, we know that access to that sort of information and access to information about the way that politics play out elsewhere can be both inspiring and impactful.
Go ahead, Moni.
Moni Sai from VOA. I was wondering whether Sebastian and Sophal think that Hun Sen would probably let his children go into the political field, and he steps behind in the next elections, if not the next one, because now, as you just mentioned, more young Cambodians, now are looking for something new. So probably, I think Hun Sen has nothing new to offer. So probably, you think he will let his children, while he's still in power, and then try to make sure his children can experience and then lead after his reign ended. In your analysis, thank you.
So, Paul, do you want to take that to start with?
Yeah, well, if I heard it right, it's a question about children, the Hun Sen's children rising to power, and certainly you can see that in the branches that they've taken. So one is in the military, a 3-star general. One is an elected member of the National Assembly. Another is a captain of industry owning TV stations and other assets. And I think the message there is essentially that of course it's every parent wants their children to succeed, and particularly this one wants his children to continue the legacy that Papa has built. But obviously there are other leaders who also want the same for their children, and one of the arguments for why some have not been able to enter politics or were refrained from entering politics was that they're seen as not having paid their dues, frankly, and simply sliding right into a position of power, not having paid their dues, not having, I suppose, smoked the cigarettes back in the 1980s, the one cigarette that was smuggled across the border or whatnot, that's not enough shared experience, having essentially grown up a relatively privileged childhood studying in the United States or in Australia or elsewhere, and essentially not seeing the struggle from the 1980s onward. And so I would think that there would be even internal competition there with respect to whose child should rise to the next position, and that would be natural to observe. So the only check against that at this point would be that other senior members of the government have hopes for their kids and understand that those positions should be competitive and not simply handed down as if they were some sort of peerage system.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a protracted and complex series of negotiations that will precede any, the selection of any of the children of the current leadership to carry on the legacy. I think a lot hinges on Hun Sen's persuasive ability, the ability to bring the rest of the party along with, the idea that his family become the, de facto royal family of Cambodia. And, his children, by all accounts, are very able, well-educated. Unlike some of his more distant relatives, they've been very well behaved. There's been no AK-47s going off in the streets, no high-speed car chases, no, beating up of Japanese tourists. These are all real examples that have taken place. Some more distant members of his family. By all accounts, they'd be, able members of a government, but again, what Sophal says is right. The fact that the idea that they just get granted this, not only cuts against our idea of, merit in a sort of democratic system, but also it cuts against potential competition from within the party. And Hun Sen is still relatively young. He turns 65 in August. And so while I think a handover is probably going to happen in the next decade, it's a handover of some kind. Hun Sen probably still has another mandate in him, and just the question is merely one of timing and whether he can perform the necessary negotiations with the party in order to, establish consensus on the issue.
And he said that he's willing to rule until his 80s, right, or another 20 years. A couple of years ago,
he said till 2028 or so. I mean, he says, one time he said until he's 90 years old. But as Sophal says, right, life is impermanence, right? And then, every time catches up with everybody. We've seen the slow dying off over the last few years of the older generation of CPP leaders, people like Chia Sim, who was one of Hun Sen's rivals for many years. He was born in 32, about roughly 20 years before Hun Sen was. And most of that generation now is gone or very old. And that even the next generation that were born in the late 40s, early 50s are now starting to get into that time when anything can happen. And the death of Sokan, who is Hun Sen's main sort of bureaucratic shot caller in the Council of Ministers, his death just a few months ago was a sign that time catches up with everybody.
Time is catching up.
And it came as quite a shock,
Go ahead,
actually.
Sophal.
No, I was going to say that Sagan's death came as quite a shock to a number of people because it was quite unexpected, and so one can't assume anything about the health of even the current leadership. It's really quite possible that things could happen, despite any electoral victories.
I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Hi, I'm Nicole from the National Bureau of Asian Research. My question is, so we're seeing China edging closer to Cambodia or the other way around, and we're also expecting to see cuts in aid from the U.S., and we're also seeing a White House that's virtually silent on human rights. So what ways can or should the U.S. continue to engage with Cambodia?
Difficult question. It depends what the aims of engagement are. If the aims of engagement are merely to keep a seat at the table and prevent Cambodia from becoming a fully fledged Chinese satellite, then I suppose maintaining military-to-military connections would be constructive. Invite Hun Sen to the White House. He would love an invitation to the White House more than anything. But Cambodia occupies a special position in the imagination or in the minds of a lot of American lawmakers. The fact that it was the site of such suffering during the 70s, of which the United States was involved, Perhaps not directly, but America was part of that story going all the way through. And then the fact that there was this commitment at the end of the 80s to creating a new Cambodia means that the country is often seen in a very different light than Vietnam is, for instance. The U.S. government is engaging very enthusiastically in Vietnam in a way that I don't think it is possible for it to do in Cambodia, given the views in Congress about the democratic situation there. So I think the Cambodian government has shown that it has little interest in engaging with the U.S. if the U.S. is going to be talking about issues of democracy or human rights. And whether the Trump administration cares about, I think it's fairly clear the Trump administration doesn't care about those things. So the possibility of a more transactional relationship over the next few years is definitely on the cards. But no, I think, I think that it's a difficult thing for the U.S. But I think that maintaining patience is probably the best prescription for the current moment. Just to, play the long game. Things will change, and when they do, I think it's important for the United States to be ready to, to step in.
It's interesting because the Cambodian authorities recently said that President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Accord was regrettable. I think we can finally agree on something here. And there are actually issues that the Cambodian authorities want to bring up to the U.S., which include, for example, deportations of refugees who did not become U.S. citizens but committed crimes and served their time, but then by the Immigration Reform Act of 1996 and the Memorandum of Understanding signed, I believe, in 2002 with Cambodia, became deportable as soon as Cambodia issued travel documents to them, accepting that they are, in fact, Cambodian citizens, even if they were born, for example, in Thai border refugee camps and have never set foot in Cambodia. So the Cambodian authorities have wanted to reopen negotiations on that. And I think taking what seems to be an approach that tries to divide the Cambodian community in the U.S. into camps that would be, we're still looking out for you out there in the United States, those of you who are torn apart by deportation. And of course, soon after President Trump was inaugurated, Prime Minister Hun Sen brought up the issue of the $500 million in debt owed to the United States from the Khmer Republic in the 1970s. So this is the pre-Khmer Rouge regime, but post-Sihanouk, essentially the regime that took over from Sihanouk under a coup d'etat, and has, of course, beat the drum of how to get this forgiven. But it's not something that hasn't happened before. Cambodian authorities have always raised this issue. Under Obama, it was raised. And the resolution was, at the time, as I recall, that Cambodia ought to begin repayment of that $500 million so that it could essentially start negotiations in terms of having a fund a la Vietnam Education Fund, for example, that would then take in those resources and spend them back on education in that country, or for scholars going overseas to the United States, for example. So there are some issues that are of interest to the Cambodian authorities that could be brought to bear. I think basically at the White House there's not been any reaction. Cambodia is not worth a tweet from President Trump. As I've said in the past, I don't think he knows where Cambodia is.
Well, maybe we can pose that question to him via Twitter. We've run out of time today. I think we can continue this discussion for a long time. But the important thing to know is that this commune election, the recent commune election, was the start of the 2018 national election process. And so it's something to follow over the coming year. And certainly we'll be paying close attention to it here at the Stimson Center. So I want to thank our speakers, Sebastian Strangio, Courtney Weatherby, and Sophal for coming in. Let's give them all